I'm Cassandra Mitchell, 31, and I just watched my parents' $2 million mansion go up in flames from the comfort of my porch swing. The same parents who called me foolish, who cut me out of their lives for not following their grand plans. As the fire truck's sirens wailed and my mother's hysterical cries echoed across our shared property line, I simply sipped my tea, feeling nothing but the warmth of karmic justice. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Growing up in the Mitchell family meant one thing above all else: appearances mattered. My parents, Richard and Diana Mitchell, built their entire lives around the pursuit of status, wealth, and the envy of others. Their sprawling colonial revival home in Oak Ridge Estates wasn't just a place to live, it was a statement, a crown jewel in their carefully curated image of success. I never quite fit into their vision. While my younger sister Vanessa embraced their materialistic values, becoming the perfect reflection of their ambitions, I remained stubbornly practical, more interested in finding genuine happiness than in chasing the next status symbol. The day my grandmother Eleanor passed away was bittersweet. We had always been close, kindred spirits in a family that rarely valued sentimentality over sensibility. In her final years, she had lived modestly in a small cottage on the outskirts of town, having long ago divorced my grandfather and distanced herself from the Mitchell family's obsession with wealth and status. "Your grandmother was such a disappointment," my mother had once said during a family dinner. "She could have had everything, and she chose to live like a pauper." What my mother never understood was that Grandma Eleanor had everything she truly wanted: freedom, peace, authenticity. When the lawyer called us into his office after the funeral, I expected little. Grandma Eleanor's cottage had been rented, and she had never flaunted wealth or possessions. My parents attended the reading of the will primarily out of obligation, already discussing their early departure to a scheduled vacation in the Maldives. "To my son Richard and his wife Diana," the lawyer read in a monotone voice, "I leave my collection of family photographs and my gratitude for the grandchildren they gave me, though I wish they had raised them with different MB values. NWs." My father's face tightened at this subtle rebuke, while my mother simply rolled her eyes. "To my granddaughter Vanessa, I leave my vintage jewelry collection, with the hope that someday she will understand that the most precious things in life cannot be worn or displayed." Vanessa seemed satisfied, immediately calculating the potential resale value of vintage pieces. "And to my granddaughter Cassandra, who has shown wisdom beyond her years and a spirit untainted by greed, I leave the sum of $300,000 to be used towards building the life she truly desires, not the one others expect of her." The room fell silent. My parents stared at me, their expressions shifting from surprise to calculation in an instant. $300,000 wasn't a fortune by their standards, but it was substantial, especially for someone like me who had been scraping by on a teacher's salary while sharing an apartment with 2 roommates. "Well," my father said as we exited the lawyer's office, his arm already around my shoulders in a way that felt more possessive than affectionate, "we need to talk about investment opportunities. That money could grow significantly with the right strategy." My mother nodded eagerly. "We should schedule a meeting with our financial advisor next week. Perhaps you could finally move into a proper neighborhood. Or better yet, provide some capital for Vanessa's new influencer marketing agency. She needs investors, and fail a supporting family is always the best arrangement." I remained quiet during the drive home, watching familiar landscapes pass by as my parents and sister enthusiastically planned how to spend my inheritance. Not once did they ask what I wanted. Not once did they consider that Grandma Eleanor had specifically entrusted this money to me with clear instructions about its purpose. For 2 weeks, I endured constant pressure. Dinner invitations that turned into investment pitches. Casual conversations that transformed into guilt trips about family loyalty. Vanessa's agency would be groundbreaking in the influencer marketing space. My investment would be guaranteed to multiply within a year. I would finally be contributing to the family's collective success instead of stagnating in my modest teaching career. What they didn't know was that I had already made my decision. After years of dreaming about homeownership, but watching it seem increasingly impossible in our overheated market, I had found a property that spoke to me. It wasn't in an exclusive neighborhood. It wasn't new or impressive. In fact, it was nearly a century old, a compact craftsman bungalow on Maple Street that had seen better days. But it had potential. Sound bones beneath cosmetic neglect. Character that couldn't be manufactured. And most importantly, it was within my price range, especially with Grandma Eleanor's unexpected gift making a substantial down payment possible. "I've decided what I'm doing with the inheritance," I announced during Sunday dinner at my parents' house, 3 weeks after the will reading. My father smiled confidently, raising his wine glass. "Finally ready to make a smart move, are you? Vanessa has all the paperwork ready for your investment in her agency." "Actually," I said, feeling a strange calm despite knowing the storm that was about to break, "I then bought a house." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with the sterling silver butter knife resting on my mother's imported tablecloth. "A house?" my mother finally managed, her voice rising an octave. "Where? In Oak Ridge? Lakeview Heights?" "On Maple Street," I replied. "It's a 1920s craftsman bungalow. Needs some work, but—" "Maple Street?" my father interrupted, his face flushing with anger. "That's practically on the wrong side of town. Those houses are worth nothing." "It's a perfectly nice neighborhood," I defended. "And the house has character." "Character?" Vanessa scoffed. "Is that what they're calling mold and outdated wiring these days?" My mother set down her fork with a clatter. "Cassandra, please tell me you haven't already signed papers. We can still fix this if you've only made an offer." "I close next week," I said firmly. "The money is in escrow." $300,000 for a dump on Maple Street?" My father's voice had risen to a near shout. "Your grandmother would be ashamed of such waste." "Actually," I countered, feeling a spark of anger ignite. "The house cost $190,000. I'm keeping the rest for renovations and savings. And Grandma specifically wanted me to build the life I desire, not the one others expect. Those were her exact words." My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. "This is how you repay our guidance? Our support? When you could have helped your sister launch a business that would benefit the entire family?" "Dad, it's my inheritance. Grandma gave it to me, not to Vanessa's business venture. How selfish can you be?" Vanessa snapped. "My agency could have tripled your investment in a year. Now you'll be stuck in some falling-apart house in a neighborhood where no one important will ever visit you." My mother's disappointment was perhaps the most cutting. "I always knew you lacked ambition, Cassandra, but I never thought you'd be this foolish. That money could have secured your future. Instead, you've thrown it away on a fantasy of playing house in a neighborhood we wouldn't even drive through." End. I stood up, suddenly unable to remain at the table. "I'm sorry you feel that way, but the decision is made. I'm going to be a homeowner, and I'm excited about it, even if none of you can understand why." "If you go through with this," my father said, his voice dangerously quiet, "don't expect our support when that money runs out and you're stuck with a worthless property you can't afford to maintain." "Richard," my mother cautioned, but her eyes held the same threat. "I mean it," he continued. "If you're adult enough to make this decision against all advice and family interests, you're adult enough to live with the consequences without coming back for handouts." I looked around the table at the 3 faces I'd known all my life, suddenly seeing them with painful clarity. "I've never asked for handouts, and I don't plan to start." I left dinner early that night, driving back to my apartment in tears but with a strange sense of liberation. 1 week later, I signed the final papers and received the keys to my very first home. The real estate agent, A kind woman named Marjorie, who had patiently shown me dozens of properties over the previous months, gave me a warm hug and a small houseplant as a housewarming gift. "It's a perfect starter home," she said encouragingly. "And in this market, you've made a smart investment. Property in this area is starting to attract younger buyers looking for affordability and character." I spent that first night on an air mattress in what would become my bedroom, surrounded by echoing emptiness and infinite possibility. I had texted my parents a photo of the keys with a simple message: "Officially a homeowner." No response came. Days turned into weeks, and the silence from my family grew more pronounced. My calls went unanswered. Text messages received no reply. When I sent an invitation to a small housewarming gathering, the card was returned to sender, unopened. The reality of their threat became clear. I had chosen my path against their wishes, and now I was officially cut off. Not financially, I had never depended on them for money, but emotionally, familially. The pain was acute, but strangely clarifying. For the first time in my life, I was completely free of their expectations and judgments. My little house on Maple Street became my sanctuary and my project. I learned to refinish hardwood floors by watching online tutorials. I painted every room myself, replacing the dingy beige with colors that made me smile. When the ancient water heater finally gave up, I researched options and negotiated with plumbers for the best deal on a replacement. 6 months after moving in, I was preparing Sunday breakfast in my kitchen now, sporting newly refinished cabinets and a butcher block countertop I had installed with help from my neighbor, an elderly man named Frank, who had been a carpenter before retirement, when my phone rang with a call from Vanessa. "I'm getting married," she announced without preamble. Jason proposed last weekend. Jason was her boyfriend of 8 months, the son of one of my father's business associates. Handsome, ambitious, and, according to my mother, headed for great things. "Congratulations," I replied sincerely. "I'm happy for you both. The wedding will be at the Grand Meridian in June," she continued, naming the most exclusive hotel in the city. 300 guests, minimum. Mom's already talking to event planners. That sounds lovely." A pause followed, awkward, and waited. "Look," Vanessa finally said, her voice taking on the condescending tone she had perfected since childhood. "Mom and Dad are still really upset about your situation, but I'm willing to extend an olive branch. You can be a bridesmaid if you want. Jason has 4 sisters, so you'd be one of 5, but still." The offer hung in the air, simultaneously generous and demeaning. "Thank you for thinking of me," I said carefully. "When would the dress fittings start?" "Next month. The dresses are custom Marchesa. $5,000 each, but Dad's covering it for the wedding party. And of course, you'd need to get your hair done properly. Maybe consider extensions? And you'd need to attend all the pre-wedding events: shower, bachelorette in Cabo, rehearsal dinner." As she continued listing requirements and expectations, a familiar weight settled on my chest, the same pressure I had felt throughout my childhood and young adult years. The constant measuring up, the unspoken judgment, the tacit understanding that I would never quite be enough as I was. "Vanessa," I interrupted gently, "I appreciate the invitation, but I don't think it's a good idea for me to be in the wedding party." "What?" Her shock seemed genuine. "I'm offering you a chance to be part of this family again, and you're turning it down? I've never stopped being part of this family. You all stopped acknowledging me because I made a choice you didn't agree with. A stupid choice that embarrassed all of us. Do you know how Dad has to explain to his colleagues that his daughter lives in that neighborhood? Mom can't even invite her friends over when you might drop by." The words stung, but less than they once would have. "I'm sorry you feel that way. I'd still love to attend the wedding as a guest and celebrate your special day." As a guest? Sitting with strangers at the singles table? God, Cassandra, why do you always have to make everything so difficult? Her voice had risen to the familiar pitch of a brewing Vanessa tantrum. "This is exactly why Mom and Dad get so frustrated with you. I have to go," I said, suddenly exhausted by the conversation. "Congratulations again on your engagement." I ended the call and sat at my kitchen table, the sunlight streaming through the windows I had painstakingly restored, falling on the jade plant Marjorie had given me, now thriving in its new pot. The house was quiet except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of neighborhood children playing. This was my choice. My life. Imperfect. Challenging at times, but authentically mine. I wasn't invited to the Nessa's wedding after all. I sent a gift, an EYA handcrafted serving bowl from a local artisan, wrapped beautifully with a sincere card wishing the couple happiness. It was returned unopened 2 weeks later. Life continued. I settled into routines that became treasured rituals. Sunday mornings spent gardening in the small but flourishing backyard. Weekday evenings often passed with a book on my porch swing. I made friends in the neighborhood real. Genuine connections with people who never asked about my family status or my career ambitions, who simply enjoyed my company for what it was. My teaching career flourished too. Without the constant pressure to pursue something more prestigious or lucrative, I found renewed passion for education. I created innovative literature programs for my high school students, eventually winning a district teaching award that came with a small grant for classroom supplies. Almost a year after purchasing my home, I received a surprising letter. It was from a developer who had begun purchasing properties in the area, intending to renovate them for resale at a significant markup. They offered me $250,000 for my house, $60,000 more than I had paid. For a brief moment, I considered it. The profit would be substantial, especially considering the renovations I had completed with my own hands had cost far less than professional work would have. But where would I go? What would I gain beyond money? And what would I lose? I declined the offer. 2 months later, they returned with a new proposal. $300,000. Again, I refused. My home wasn't just a financial investment. It was where I had found myself, where I had built the life Grandma Eleanor had envisioned for me. The third time the developer contacted me, their offer had risen to $350,000. This time, the letter included additional information. They had purchased the property directly behind mine, an old Victorian that had been vacant for years, and were planning an extensive renovation. They were also in talks with several other homeowners on my street. "The neighborhood is changing," the letter stated diplomatically. "Property values will soon reflect this transformation, creating a unique investment opportunity for early sellers." I understood the implicit message. Gentrification was coming to Maple Street, bringing with it boutique coffee shops, artisanal bakeries, and inevitably, higher property taxes. Long-term residents like Frank, my carpenter neighbor, living on a fixed income, would eventually be priced out. That night, I called a community meeting at the local library. 15 neighbors attended, many of whom I had come to know well over the months. I shared the developers' letters and my concerns about what their plans might mean for our diverse working-class neighborhood. "They're offering good money," admitted Elena, a single mother who lived 3 doors down from me. "And my roof needs replacing. I don't know if I can afford to turn them down." "The taxes will go up for all of us once they start flipping houses," Frank pointed out. "My Social Security won't stretch to cover much more than I'm already paying." By the end of the meeting, we had formed a neighborhood association with a simple purpose: to support each other through the coming changes and preserve as much of our community's character and accessibility as possible. We couldn't stop development entirely, but we could advocate for responsible growth and protections for long-term residents. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, fighting against exactly the kind of upscale transformation my parents would have celebrated, the very thing that might have made them finally approve of my housing choice. But I had learned to value different things now: community, authenticity, the connections that make a neighborhood more than just a collection of properties. Summer arrived with record-breaking heat. I was in my backyard one Saturday morning, tending to my vegetable garden before the day became too hot, when I heard a familiar voice calling my name from the side gate. "Cassandra? Cassie, is that you?" My mother stood there, looking oddly out of place in her designer sundress and impractical sandals. For a moment, I thought I might be hallucinating from the heat. It had been over a year since I had seen or spoken to either of my parents. "Mom?" I set down my gardening tools and approached the gate. "What are you doing here?" She glanced around, taking in the modest backyard with its raised vegetable beds, the small patio where I had laid salvaged brick in a herringbone pattern, the wind chimes hanging from the mature oak tree that had been one of the house's selling points. "I was in the area," she said vaguely. "Phone I might stop by. See how you're managing." I opened the gate to let her in, acutely aware of my dirt-stained jeans and sweaty t-shirt. "Would you like some iced tea? I just made a fresh batch." She nodded, following me to the back porch, where a mismatched set of chairs surrounded a small table I had refinished myself. As I poured tea into mason jars, no formal glassware, and my cupboard's eye saw her taking in every detail of my home's exterior. "The garden looks nice," she offered, sounding genuinely surprised. "Did you do all this yourself?" "Most of it. Frank from next door helped with some of the heavy lifting. He taught me how to repair the sagging porch steps, too." My mother sipped her tea, her expression unreadable. "Your father and I saw the article in the Tribune last month, about your teaching award." "Oh." I hadn't expected them to notice, much less mention it. "It was just a district thing. Not a big deal. They called you innovative. Said you've improved reading scores significantly in your department. My students work hard. They deserve the credit." An awkward silence fell between us, filled only by the distant sounds of neighborhood life, a lawnmower rumbling, children shouting playfully, someone's radio playing old Motown hits. "Why are you really here, Mom?" I finally asked. She set down her tea, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her dress. "Vanessa is pregnant. You're going to be an aunt." "That's wonderful news," I said sincerely. "When is she due?" "November. They've already started converting one of their guest rooms into a nursery. Top designers, of course, everything custom." Of course, I thought, but didn't say. "There's going to be a baby shower next month," she continued. "Very exclusive, at the country club. I thought, perhaps you might want to attend." The invitation hung in the air, weighted with unspoken conditions and expectations. After more than a year of silence, was I suddenly acceptable again because they needed another body at a society event? Or was this genuinely an attempted reconciliation? Would Dad and Vanessa actually want me there? I asked quietly. My mother's hesitation told me everything. "Your father feels that family should come together for important occasions, regardless of past disagreements." "Disagreements? Mom, you all cut me out of your lives because I bought this house instead of investing in Vanessa's business. We were disappointed in your choices," she said stiffly. "We still are. But with a grandchild coming, certain allowances need to be made." Allowances. As if my existence needed to be tolerated rather than celebrated. As if I were still the problem child who had failed to meet expectations. "I appreciate the invitation," I said carefully, "but I'll need to think about it." My mother nodded, standing to leave. At the gate, she paused, looking back at the house. "You've kept it very tidy," she offered, clearly struggling to find something positive to say. "Though I don't understand why you haven't accepted one of those developers' offers. With what they're paying, you could move somewhere much more suitable. How do you know about those offers?" She had the grace to look momentarily embarrassed. "Vanessa's friend Melissa works for the development company. She mentioned they'd been trying to buy this property. This is my home, Mom, not just a property." She shook her head in that familiar way that had always made me feel small. This sentimental attachment to things isn't practical, Cassandra. It never has been. That was your grandmother's problem, too. After she left, I sat on my porch for a long time, watching the neighborhood I had grown to love going about its Saturday routines. Children raced bikes down the sidewalk. Frank waved as he headed out to his weekly Veterans Coffee meetup. Elena's teenage daughter was washing their car in the driveway, music blasting from a portable speaker. I did not attend Vanessa's baby shower. Instead, I sent another carefully chosen gift-a-handmade quilt from a local artisan, soft and beautiful without designer labels or luxury price tags. This time, it wasn't returned, though no thank you note ever arrived. Autumn came, painting Maple Street in glorious shades of red and gold. The massive oak in my backyard dropped leaves faster than I could rake them, but I didn't mind. There was something meditative about the repetitive motion, the earthy smell, the gradual transformation of the landscape. One crisp October morning, I was surprised by another unexpected visitor. My father stood at my front door, looking older and more tired than I remembered, his usual confident posture slightly stooped. "Dad? Is everything okay? Is it Vanessa the baby?" "Everyone's fine," he assured me quickly. "Your sister's not due for another few weeks. May I come in?" I led him into my living room, hastily clearing books from the comfortable armchair I had found at a thrift store and reupholstered. He sat stiffly, his gaze traveling around the room, taking in the exposed brick wall I had uncovered during renovations. The built-in bookshelves now filled with my collection, the warm colors and personal touches that made the space unmistakably mine. "Your mother said you'd fix the place up, but I didn't expect—" He trailed off, seemingly at a loss for words. "It's still not up to Mitchell family standards," I said, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from my voice. "But it suits me." He nodded, then reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew an envelope. "I came to give you this." I accepted it cautiously. Inside was a check for $50,000. "What's this for?" "Your grandmother's inheritance," he said, as if it should be obvious. "Or part of it, anyway. It seems you were right about this neighborhood. Property values have nearly doubled since you purchased this house. Your investment has performed quite well." I stared at the check, understanding dawning slowly. "You're giving me money because my house went up in value? Because my decision turned out to be financially sound after all?" He shifted uncomfortably. "We may have been hasty in our judgment. The market has moved in unexpected directions." "So, if my house had lost value instead, you wouldn't be here? I'd still be the family disappointment?" "Cassandra, I'm trying to make amends." "No," I said, handing the check back to him. "You're trying to be right. You always have to be right, Dad, even when you're admitting you were wrong." He didn't take the check. "This money is yours. Do whatever you want with it." "I don't want your money. I never did. What I wanted was your support, your respect, your acceptance of my choices, even when they weren't the ones you would have made." He stood abruptly. "Fine. Keep the moral high ground if it makes you feel better. But the offer to rejoin the family stands. Vanessa is having a girl. Your mother is planning a christening for January. You should be there." After he left, I sat with the check in my hands, considering my options. I could tear it up in a grand gesture of independence. I could cash it and add it to my savings. I could donate it to the neighborhood association we had formed to help residents with rising property taxes. In the end, I did something different. I invited Elena and Frank over for dinner that evening and proposed an idea that had been forming in my mind for months. With the developer's latest offer for my HUSN now up to $400,000 and my father's guilt money, we could create a small investment group. We would buy one of the vacant properties on our street, renovate it affordably while maintaining its character, and rent it at below-market rates to a family who would contribute positively to our community. A sort of anti-gentrification project, Elena said, understanding immediately. Keeping the neighborhood accessible. It wouldn't be hugely profitable, I cautioned. But it could be sustainable, and it would give us some control over how the neighborhood changes. Frank, who had been quiet throughout my explanation, finally spoke. You know, I've been a carpenter for 4 to 5 years. Never thought I'd be putting those skills toward fighting rich developers. But I like it. Count me in for the renovation work. By the time Vanessa gave birth to my niece Eloise in early November, our little investment group had grown to include 5 neighbors, each contributing what they could in money, labor, or expertise. We had purchased a small bungalow 3 doors down from mine that had been vacant for years, and work was already underway to make it livable again. I sent a gift for the Babia collection of classic children's books, each with a personal inscription about the magic of reading and imagination. This time, a formal thank you note arrived, printed on expensive stationery but signed in what appeared to be Vanessa's actual handwriting. Progress, of a sort. The christening invitation arrived as predicted, addressed formally to Ms. Cassandra Mitchell, as if I were a business associate rather than family. I RSVP'd that I would attend, scheduling time off from school and planning my outfit carefully professional and appropriate without being showy, much like the person I had become. The event was exactly as I had expected. Elaborate, formal, more focused on impressing the guests than celebrating the child. The church had been decorated with thousands of dollars worth of white flowers. The reception afterward at my parents' home featured catered hors d'oeuvres, champagne flowing freely, and a string quartet playing softly in the corner. I stood awkwardly at the periphery, accepting cool greetings from relatives who seemed unsure how to interact with the prodigal daughter. Vanessa, resplendent in a post-pregnancy body that seemed impossibly perfect, thanks, I later learned, to an army of personal trainers and nutritionists, barely acknowledged my presence until it was time for dawn. Family photos. You should be in a few, she said magnanimously. For Eloise's sake, so she knows who her aunt is. That's thoughtful, I replied, genuinely appreciative of this small olive branch. As the photographer arranged us in various groupings, I caught my mother watching me with an unreadable expression. Later, as guests began to depart, she approached me with 2 flutes of champagne, offering one as a tentative peace offering. You look well, she said, studying me. Teaching agrees with you. Thank you, I love my work. She nodded, sipping her champagne. Your father mentioned you've started some kind of housing project with your neighbors? We're renovating a property to rent at affordable rates, I explained. Trying to maintain some economic diversity in the neighborhood as it develops. Always the idealist, she murmured, but without the dismissive edge her voice usually carried when discussing my choices. Like your grandmother. I'll take that as a compliment. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. She would have been proud of you, you know. Eleanor never did care what anyone thought. It drove your grandfather crazy. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years, perhaps ever. As I prepared to leave, my mother surprised me by pulling me into a brief, awkward hug. Maybe you could visit sometimes, she suggested. Get to know Eloise. She should know her aunt. I'd like that, I said, and meant it. Progress came in small steps over the following months. Occasional visits to see my niece. Brief, somewhat strained family dinners. My parents never fully understood or approved of my choices, but they had begun to accept that they didn't need to. Vanessa remained Vanessa self-centered, and status-conscious but motherhood had softened her slightly, opening tiny cracks in her perfect facade. Meanwhile, our neighborhood project flourished. The renovated bungalow became home to a young teacher and her mother, who quickly integrated into the community, volunteering at local events and starting a small after-school tutoring program in their living room. Why? Encouraged by our success, we began looking for a second property to purchase. Spring arrived, bringing with it unexpected challenges. Heavy rains caused flooding in parts of the city, including some areas of my neighborhood. Our investment property suffered minor water damage, but my house and most others on the block were spared, thanks to the slightly elevated position of Maple Street. Not everyone was so fortunate. The exclusive Oak Ridge Estates, where my parents lived, experienced significant flooding due to poor drainage planning in some of the newer sections. Their house, situated at the bottom of a gentle slope, took on several inches of water before emergency services could respond. "It's a disaster," my mother reported tearfully over the phone. "The hardwood floors are ruined, the custom drapes, the Persian rugs. Insurance will cover some of it, but they're saying it could take months to repair everything properly. Where will you stay in the meantime?" I asked, genuinely concerned. "We've taken a suite at the Grand Meridian for now," she said, naming the city's most expensive hotel. "But we can't live there indefinitely. Your father is talking to realtors about short-term luxury rentals, but everything suitable is already taken. So many homes in the neighborhood were affected." A thought formed in my mind, crazy, potentially disastrous, but somehow feeling right. "You could stay in my guest room," I offered. "It's not what you're used to, but it's clean and dry." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. "Mom? Are you still there? You want us to stay in your house on Maple Street?" "Just until you find something else. I know it's not what you'd prefer, but it's a practical solution." Another long pause followed. "I'll discuss it with your father and call you back." To my astonishment, they accepted. My father's gruff explanation it makes financial sense while we explore options barely disguise the reality. They had nowhere else to go that met their standards and budget constraints. Preparing for their arrival, I cleaned my already tidy home to an unprecedented shine. The guest room was small but comfortable, with a queen bed, a refurbished antique dresser, and a small writing desk by the window. I cleared closet space, stocked the bathroom with the brands of toiletries I remembered them using, and bought groceries to accommodate my mother's various dietary preferences. They arrived on a Sunday afternoon, my father's luxury sedan looking comically out of place parked in front of my modest bungalow. Neighbors watched curiously from porches and yards as Richard and Diana Mitchell, dressed as if attending a country club luncheon, wheeled designer luggage up my front path. "It's cozy," my mother managed as I showed them around. My father said nothing, his expression frozen in a polite mask that failed to hide his discomfort. That first evening was excruciating. We navigated the shared spaces like diplomatic delegations from hostile nations, careful not to provoke incidents. My parents ate the dinner I prepared, a simple but delicious pasta dish with stiff compliments that couldn't disguise their longing for fine dining. "The bathroom is down the hall," I explained as we prepared for bed. "We'll have to share, I'm afraid. The water pressure isn't great, but if you run it for a minute before showering, it improves." My mother nodded tightly. My father checked his watch, as if counting the hours until escape was possible. By the third day, small cracks in their facade began to appear. My mother, bored and unable to engage in her usual social activities due to the chaos in her neighborhood, tentatively offered to help me prepare dinner. My father, finding the guest room desk too small for his laptop, sat up at my dining table, grumbling about internet speeds but gradually relaxing into the space. "These tomatoes are excellent," my mother commented over dinner. "So much flavor." "They're from my garden," I explained. "The growing season is just beginning, but the early varieties are coming in nicely." "You grow your own vegetables?" She seemed genuinely surprised, as if this were an exotic hobby. "It's common in this neighborhood. Elena down the street has an amazing herb garden. She's teaching me about medicinal plants." The rhythm of cohabitation gradually became less awkward. My parents adapted to the smaller space with varying degrees of grace. My mother discovered the farmer's market 5 blocks away and developed an unexpected interest in fresh, local produce. My father found a coffee shop within walking distance that met his exacting standards, establishing a morning routine that seemed to ground him. Your neighbors are very friendly, my mother observed one evening as we sat on the front porch. She had just returned from a walk where she'd been greeted by name by at least 3 different households. That's one of the things I love about living here, I replied. People know each other. They look out for each other. She murmured, neither approving nor disapproving. Different from Oak Ridge. I don't think I've spoken to the people next door more than twice in 5 years. 2 weeks into their stay, disaster struck again. A major pipe burst in my parents' home, further delaying repairs and extending their exile. My father received the news with surprising equanimity. "Another month, at least," he reported after a call with the contractor. "The water damage was more extensive than they initially thought." "You're welcome to stay as long as you need," I offered, surprised to find I meant it. The constant tension of the first days had eased into something approaching comfortable coexistence. As April bloomed into May, my parents settled into life on Maple Street with unexpected adaptability. My mother joined me in the garden, tentatively at first, then with growing enthusiasm as seedlings she had planted began to sprout. My father, to everyone's surprise, struck up a friendship with Frank next door, the 2 men finding common ground in discussions of woodworking and home maintenance. "Your neighbor has quite the workshop in his garage," my father mentioned casually one evening. "Showed me how he restored those porch columns. Impressive craftsmanship." "Frank's taught me almost everything I know about home repair," I said. "He's been an amazing neighbor." My father nodded thoughtfully. "I can see why you value that." The neighborhood association meeting fell during their 3rd week with me. I explained I needed to attend, expecting them to spend the evening in their room or perhaps at a restaurant downtown. "What exactly does this association do?" my father asked unexpectedly. "We're working on several initiatives," I explained. "A grant application for sidewalk repairs, a community garden on the vacant lot behind a park, supporting residents affected by rising property taxes." Mind if I attend? Might be interesting." I stared at him, certain I had misheard. "You want to come to a neighborhood association meeting?" "I have some experience with municipal grant applications," he said with a shrug. "Could be useful." That evening, I watched in astonishment as my father, wealthy, status-conscious Richard Mitchell, sat in the community center on metal folding chairs, actively engaged in discussions about zoning regulations and Bornay, property tax relief programs. He asked intelligent questions, offered relevant suggestions, and even volunteered to review our grant proposal before submission. Walking home afterward, he was unusually quiet, his face contemplative. "Everything okay, Dad?" He nodded slowly. "Just thinking. Your neighbors, they're good people. Working hard, taking care of their community. Different priorities than I'm used to, but I can respect that." It was perhaps the closest he had ever come to expressing approval of my life choices. By early June, my parents' home was finally ready for their return. The repairs had expanded into a partial renovation, with updated fixtures and finishes throughout the water-damaged areas. I helped them pack their belongings, surprised by the twinge of melancholy I felt at the prospect of returning to my solitary routine. "We can't thank you enough for your hospitality," my mother said as they prepared to leave, her gratitude seemingly genuine. "It wasn't what we expected, but it was enlightening." My father nodded in agreement. "You've built something meaningful here, Cassandra. Not just the house, but your place in this community. I didn't understand that before." Their departure left my home feeling strangely empty. I had grown accustomed to morning coffee with my mother, evening news with my father, the small daily negotiations of shared space. But along with the quiet came a profound sense of validation. They had seen my life up close, not the failure they had imagined, but something genuine and worthwhile in its own right. Our relationship shifted subtly after their stay. Sunday dinners at their newly restored home became a regular occurrence. My father consulted me about potential investments, actually listening to my perspective. My mother asked about my neighbors, remembering names and details. Vanessa remained somewhat distant, but occasionally brought Eloise for visits, allowing me to develop a relationship with my niece. Late summer brought a heat wave and a startling proposition. The developer who had been pursuing my property for over a year made one final offer, $500,000, more than double what I had paid. I almost laughed when I received the letter. The figure that would once have seemed life-changing now felt beside the point. "You're really not sewing?" my father asked when I mentioned the offer during dinner at their home. "That's a substantial profit." "It's not about the money anymore," I explained. "It's my home. It's where I belong." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "I understand. Sometimes the right investment isn't about the highest return." Coming from my father, this represented a seismic shift in worldview. Autumn arrived with golden light and crisp mornings. My second year in the house brought new projects replacing the aging roof, adding insulation for better energy efficiency, creating a small studio space in what had been a neglected attic. I approached each task with confidence born of experience, no longer the hesitant novice but a capable homeowner. The neighborhood continued its gradual transformation. Some longtime residents sold to developers and moved away. New businesses opened on the commercial streets bordering our area, some welcome additions, others harbingers of rising costs to come. Our investment property remained a small but significant holdout, providing affordable housing in an increasingly expensive market. One evening in late September, I was grading papers on my front porch when a sleek black car pulled up in front of my house. A man in an expensive suit emerged, consulting his phone before approaching my gate. "Cassandra Mitchell?" he inquired. "Yes." "Robert Keller, with Magnus Development." He offered a business card. "I believe you're familiar with our previous offers for your property. I've declined them all," I reminded him. "That hasn't changed." He smiled smoothly. "I'm not here about your house, Ms. Mitchell. I'm here about your parents' property in Oak Ridge Estates." My confusion must have shown on my face. "My parents' house? Why would you be talking to me about that? Perhaps I should explain inside?" Reluctantly, I invited him in, curious despite my wariness. We sat in my living room, the man perching uncomfortably on the edge of my vintage sofa, as if afraid of contamination. "Magnus Development has recently acquired several properties in Oak Ridge Estates," he explained. "The flooding incident revealed significant infrastructure problems in that section of the neighborhood. We're planning a comprehensive redevelopment." "And what does this have to do with my parents?" "We've made offers to all homeowners in the affected area. Most have accepted, recognizing the potential liabilities of remaining. Your parents, however, have been resistant." I couldn't help the small smile that formed. "That sounds like them. They've suggested we speak with you, as you apparently have experience dealing with developers in residential neighborhoods." His tone made it clear he found this referral peculiar. "They mentioned you might be willing to review our proposal and offer your perspective." The irony was almost too perfect. My parents, who had once cut me off for refusing to follow their real estate advice, were now seeking mine in dealing with developers. I accepted the folder he offered, promising to review it thoroughly. What I found was troubling. The comprehensive redevelopment involved demolishing existing homes, including my parents', to build luxury condominiums and high-end retail spaces. The compensation offered was substantial, but below true market value, and the fine print contained concerning waivers of liability related to the flooding issues. I called my father immediately after the developer left. "Have you read this contract thoroughly?" "Parts of it," he admitted. "The numbers look reasonable, but some of the legal language is dense. That's why I wanted you to look at it. You've learned a lot about these things with your neighborhood group." "Dad, this is a terrible deal. They're buying your property at a discount because of the flood damage." then turning around to build structures worth 3 times as much. And they want you to waive any right to sue over the drainage issues that caused the flooding in the first place." End quote. A long silence followed. "I suspected as much," he finally said. "But I wanted confirmation from someone who's been on the front lines of these battles. Someone I could trust." Trust. From my father, the word carried extraordinary weight. "What are you going to do?" I asked. "Fight, of course," he replied, a hint of the old Richard Mitchell Steele returning to his voice. "These developers think they can take advantage of us because of one unfortunate incident. They don't know who they're dealing with." Over the following weeks, I watched with a mixture of pride and amusement as my father applied his considerable business acumen and connections to organizing the Oak Ridge Estate's homeowners. He hired independent engineers to assess the drainage issues, retained a specialized real estate attorney, and began negotiating with the city about infrastructure improvements. "It's remarkably similar to what your neighborhood association does," he observed during one of our strategy sessions. "Just with bigger budgets and more expensive lawyers." "The principles are the same," I agreed. "People protecting their homes and communities from exploitation." Our roles had reversed in a way neither of us could have imagined. Now I was the advisor, the one with valuable experience and perspective. And to my surprise, he listened, implementing many of my suggestions about community organizing and public pressure campaigns. By late October, Magnus Development withdrew their proposal, unable to secure sufficient properties to make their project viable. My father became something of a hero among his neighbors, the man who had stood firm against corporate interests and won. "We couldn't have done it without your insight," he acknowledged during a celebratory dinner at their home. "You saw through their tactics immediately." "I had good teachers," I replied, gesturing to include both my parents. "You always told me to look beyond the surface of any deal, to understand the true motivations of the people across the table." My mother smiled, reaching across to squeeze my hand. "We taught you business sense. But this wisdom about communities and people standing together that you taught yourself, that's all you, Cassandra." It was perhaps the most profound compliment she had ever paid me. As winter approached, my parents began discussing renovations to their home. The repairs after the flooding had been functional but basic, focused on restoring habitability rather than updating the aging property. "The kitchen really needs modernizing," my mother mused during one of our Sunday dinners. "And the master bathroom is so dated." "We're thinking of a complete overhaul," my father added. "While property values are climbing in the area, it makes sense to invest in improvements." "Who are you thinking of hiring?" I asked, remembering their usual preference for the most exclusive and expensive contractors in the city. They exchanged a glance. "Actually," my father said carefully, "we were wondering if your neighbor Frank might be interested in consulting. His craftsmanship is exceptional, and we trust his judgment." I nearly choked on my wine. "Frank? You want to hire Frank from Maple Street to work on your Oak Ridge Estates mansion? Is that so surprising?" my mother asked, seeming genuinely puzzled by my reaction. "Considering you once referred to my neighborhood as that place where people fix their own toilets, yes, it's a bit surprising." My father had the grace to look embarrassed. "Our perspectives have evolved. Quality work is quality work, regardless of who does it or where they live." I relayed their interest to Frank, who was both flattered and amused. "Never thought I'd be renovating a house in Oak Ridge," he chuckled. "Life sure takes some unexpected turns." "Tell me about it." I agreed. The renovation began in November, with Frank assembling a team that included several other skilled tradespeople from our neighborhood. My father, to everyone's surprise, took an active interest in the process, frequently stopping by to discuss details and learn about techniques. "Your dad's got a good eye," Frank told me one evening after returning from a day at the Mitchell residence. Asked some smart questions about the cabinetry installation. Even rolled up his sleeves to help when we needed an extra pair of hands. The image of my father, who had once considered manual labor beneath him helping to install kitchen cabinets, was almost impossible to reconcile with the man who had disowned me for buying a craftsman bungalow. December brought unseasonably warm weather and an unexpected invitation. My parents were hosting their annual holiday party, a lavish affair that typically included business associates, society friends, and family members deemed successful enough to display. "We'd love for you to attend," my mother said during one of our regular calls. "And bring someone if you'd like." The casual addition took me by surprise. Bring someone? "A friend, a date, whoever you'd like to invite," she clarified. "We've scheduled it for the 20th, so it won't interfere with your school break plans." I considered declining, remembering the discomfort of previous Mitchell holiday gatherings, the subtle competitions, the status signaling, the exhausting performance of success and happiness. But curiosity won out. How would it feel to return to these events as the person I had become, rather than the person they had wanted me to be? "I'll be there," I promised. The night of the party, I dressed carefully in a simple but elegant dress purchased from a local boutique. My +1 was Elena from down the street, whose warm personality and sharp intelligence I knew would serve as both support and shield in navigating the evening. We arrived to find the renovation in full swing, with only the public areas of the house completed in time for the party. The new kitchen gleamed with high-end appliances and custom cabinetry, but bore Frank's unmistakable craftsmanship in the details: dovetail, joints, hand-carved moldings, clever storage solutions that married beauty with function. "Your neighbor does magnificent work," gushed one of my mother's friends, running her hand along the kitchen island. "Diana says he's booked solid for the next year with referrals from this project alone." I smiled, imagining Frank's workshop overflowing with commissions from Oak Ridge Estates residents. Worlds colliding in ways none of us could have predicted. As the evening progressed, I noticed subtle changes in the gathering compared to previous years. Yes, there were still the expected displays of wealth and status, but the conversations seemed less competitive, more genuine. My father introduced me to his business associates with evident pride, emphasizing my teaching accomplishments and community work rather than apologizing for my modest lifestyle. "Cassandra has been instrumental in creating a neighborhood investment group," he told one colleague, actually using the word instrumental to describe something I had done. "They're pioneering an innovative approach to housing equity." My mother, meanwhile, had cornered Elena and was deep in conversation about sustainable gardening practices, taking notes on her phone about companion planting and natural pest control methods. "Your parents are not what I expected," Elena murmured when we finally had a moment alone. "They study your stories. I thought they'd be judgmental? Materialistic? Obsessed with appearances? Well, yes." I gazed across the room at my father, animated as he described to several guests the clever storage system Frank had designed for the mudroom. "They've changed. Or at least, they're changing." I'm not sure I would have believed it if I hadn't seen it happen gradually. "People can surprise you," Elena observed. "Sometimes it just takes the right circumstances to reveal different aspects of who they are." The party wound down around midnight, guests departing with warm embraces and promises to reconnect in the new year. As Elena and I prepared to leave, my mother pulled me aside. "We were thinking of having a small family dinner on Christmas Eve," she said. "Just us, Vanessa, Jason, and the baby. Would you join us?" "I'd like that," I replied sincerely. "Good." She hesitated, then added, "And maybe for New Year's, we could come to your place? See what all the fuss is about regarding Maple Street's famous block party?" I laughed, genuinely delighted by the suggestion. "The neighbors would love to have you. Frank might even let Dad help with the annual fireworks setup." "Heaven help us all," she murmured, but her smile was warm. As Elena and I drove back to our neighborhood, the contrast between the Oak Ridge mansion and my modest bungalow felt less stark than it once had. Both were homes, places of belonging. The value lay not in square footage or zip codes, but in the lives built within their walls. Your parents seem to be coming around, Elena observed. That's a significant change from how things were when you first moved to Maple Street. It's taken time, I acknowledged. And honestly, I'm not sure it would have happened if they hadn't been forced to stay with me after the flooding. Seeing my life up close changed something for them. The holiday season passed in a blur of school activities, community events, and family gatherings that felt more genuine than any in my memory. My parents attended the Maple Street New Year's celebration, as promised. My father somewhat awkwardly helping Frank with the modest fireworks display while my mother chatted with neighbors she had met during her stay. January brought a Belaine. New semester at school and the completion of my parents' renovation. Frank and his team had transformed the aging mansion into something both elegant and welcoming, maintaining its grandeur while infusing it with warmth and purpose. We're having a small gathering next weekend to celebrate the renovation, my mother informed me during our weekly call. Nothing fancy, just a few friends and the people who worked on the house. We'd love for you to come. Of course. Can I bring anything? Just yourself. Oh, and I've invited some of your neighbors too, Frank, obviously, and that lovely Elena. They've become quite important to us through this process. The casual acknowledgement of connection to my community warmed me more than any formal reconciliation could have. The gathering was, indeed, small and surprisingly informal by Mitchell standards. My parents moved through their beautifully renovated home with evident pride, but the focus remained on the craftsmanship and the people who had created it, rather than on the status the home represented. Frank was just showing us the hidden features he built into the master closet. My father told me, guiding me upstairs. Ingenious space utilization. As we toured the second floor, I noticed a door slightly ajar to what had once been a rarely used guest room. Glancing inside, I was startled to see children's books on the bedside table and a small collection of toys arranged neatly on a handcrafted shelf. Is that for Eloise? I asked, surprised by the thoughtful preparation for my niece's visits. Yes, and... My father hesitated. We thought it would be good to have a proper space for any children who visit, including yours, someday, if that's something you want. The acknowledgement that my future children hypothetical as they might be would be welcomed as fully as Vanessa's touched me deeply. Not an assumption that I would follow her path, but an acceptance that whatever path I chose would be valid and valued. Thank you, I said simply. Later that evening, as guests began to depart, I found myself alone with my parents in their new kitchen, a space that somehow managed to be both luxurious and homey. The house looks amazing, I told them sincerely. Frank and his team did incredible work. We couldn't be happier with how it turned out, my mother agreed. Though I have to admit, I sometimes missed your little garden. The vegetables really did taste better than anything from the store. You're welcome to plant one here, I suggested. There's plenty of space in the backyard. She brightened at the idea. I might just do that. Your father has already been discussing raised bed designs with Frank. My father cleared his throat. Actually, while we have a moment alone, there's something we wanted to discuss with you. The formal tone immediately put me on alert. What is it? My parents exchanged a glance before my father continued. We've been doing some estate planning recently, updating our wills, reorganizing investments, that sort of thing. Okay, I said cautiously, unsure where this was heading. We've decided to make some changes to how our assets will eventually be distributed, my mother explained. In the past, we had planned different proportions for you and Danessa, based on our assessment of your financial judgment. I tensed, the old wounds threatening to reopen. And now? Now, my father said firmly, we've created a more equitable arrangement, equal shares, with some specific provisions for Eloise's education and any future grandchildren. Plus, my mother added, we've established a charitable foundation focused on affordable housing initiatives. We thought you might be interested in helping to direct those efforts, given your experience with your neighborhood investment group. I stared at them, momentarily speechless. This wasn't just financial equalization, it was recognition of the value of my path, my choices, my priorities. I'd be honored, I finally managed. Good. My father nodded, the matter settled in his practical way. We'll have the lawyers send over the relevant documents next week. I drove home that night under a canopy of winter stars, my mind replaying the extraordinary evolution of my relationship with my parents over the past 2 years. From rejection to reconciliation, from dismissal to respect. Not perfect, not without lingering differences and occasional tensions, but genuine and growing. February arrived with plummeting temperatures and heavy snow. Schools closed for several days as the city struggled to clear roads and restore power to affected areas. My little bungalow, with its recently improved insulation and efficient wood stove, remained cozy despite the storm. I had just settled in for a quiet evening of reading when my phone rang. It was my father, his voice tight with tension. Cassandra, are you home? Yes, why? Is everything okay? There's been a fire at our house, an electrical fire, they think, started in the walls of the master bathroom. Oh my God. Are you and Mom all right? We're fine. We were downstairs when it started, got out immediately and called the fire department, but they're saying it spread quickly. The new wiring. His voice broke slightly. The company we hired for the electrical work during the renovation apparently cut some corners, used substandard materials, improper installation. Where are you now? At the end of the driveway, watching it burn. The raw emotion in his voice was unlike anything I had heard from my composed, controlled father. They're trying to contain it, but with the wind and the freezing temperatures affecting the water pressure. I'm coming over, I said immediately. Sit tight. I'll be there as soon as I can clear the driveway. 30 minutes later, I pulled up to the scene at my parents' home. Fire trucks lined the street, their lights painting the snow-covered landscape in surreal flashes of red and blue. My parents stood huddled together near their car, watching as firefighters battled the blaze that had engulfed much of the second floor. Mom, Dad! I called, hurrying toward them. Are you okay? My mother turned, her face streaked with tears and ash. Cassandra! Thank goodness you're here. I embraced them both, feeling my father's unusual vulnerability as he clung briefly to me before straightening, composing himself. The chief says they're losing the battle, he reported grimly. The fire spread through the walls faster than they expected. The new open-concept design we chose apparently eliminated some firewalls that might have contained it. We stood together in the bitter cold, watching as flames consumed the beautiful renovation that had represented so much more than home improvement. It had been a symbol of their evolution, their growth, their connection to my Dexai. World. Where will you go? I asked as it became increasingly clear that the house would be a total loss. They exchanged a glance, the unspoken communication of a long marriage. We haven't thought that far ahead, my mother admitted. A hotel, I suppose, until we can make arrangements. Don't be ridiculous, I said firmly. You're coming home with me. To Maple Street? My father seemed to consider it only briefly before nodding. Yes, that makes the most sense. If you're sure we won't be imposing. Consider it returning the favor, I replied with a small smile. As the last of the flames were finally extinguished in the early morning hours, leaving only a smoking shell where their grand home had stood, my parents gathered what few possessions had been in their car: a laptop, my mother's purse, my father's briefcase, and followed me back to my bungalow. I settled them into the guest room they had occupied during the flooding, now familiar territory in their moment of crisis. As I provided towels and spare toiletries, I was struck by the role reversal. Now I was the one offering shelter, stability, comfort. "We'll figure everything out tomorrow," I assured them. "For now, try to get some rest." In the morning, surveying my parents at my kitchen table disheveled, exhausted, but alive and Safie felt a surge of gratitude for the strange journey that had brought us to this point. 2 years earlier, they had cut me off for choosing this modest home over their grand plans. Now that same home was their refuge. "I've been thinking," my father said as I poured coffee. "About next steps." "The insurance will cover rebuilding," my mother added. "But that could take a year or more, especially with the extent of the damage." "You're welcome to stay here as long as you need," I offered. "We managed well enough last time." My father nodded thoughtfully. "Actually, I have a different idea. That property your neighborhood group renovated, Elena mentioned there's another one you've been considering?" "The Victorian on Elm Street," I confirmed, surprised by his interest. "It needs significant work, but the structure is sound. We've been discussing whether we have the resources to take it on. What if we joined your investment group?" He set down his coffee cup decisively. "We could contribute capital, help with the renovation costs. And perhaps if it turned out well, we might consider living there ourselves. At least until we decide about rebuilding in Oak Ridge." I stared at him, certain I had misheard. "You want to join our neighborhood investment group and potentially live in one of our renovation projects? On Elm Street? Why not?" My mother surprised me by supporting the idea. "We learned a lot over the past year about what makes a home, a neighborhood. It's not the address or the square footage. Besides," my father added with a hint of his old practical business sense, "property values in this area continue to appreciate. It would be a sound investment." I laughed, unable to contain my amazement at how completely our worlds had merged. "Frank is going to love this. Richard and Diana Mitchell, joining our little anti-gentrification project. We prefer to think of it as community investment with conscience," my father replied with surprising sincerity. "Something we've learned from our daughter." Later that day, as I helped my parents make lists of immediate necessities and contacted their insurance company, I stepped onto my front porch for a moment of quiet reflection. From this vantage point, I could just see the top of the hill where Oak Ridge Estates began, a thin plume of smoke still rising from what remained of my parents' home. 2 years ago, I had been the family disappointment, cut off for the foolish decision to buy this modest house. Now I was their shelter, their advisor, their guide to a different kind of value than the one they had spent their lives pursuing. My grandmother Eleanor would have appreciated the poetry of it. Her gift, intended to help me build the life I truly desired, had done exactly that, but in ways none of us could have imagined. Not just a home of my own, but a community, a purpose, and ultimately, a healed relationship with my family based on genuine respect rather than conformity. As I watched the last wisps of smoke disappear into the winter sky, I felt no triumph at the destruction of the mansion that had once symbolized everything that separated me from my parents' world. Only gratitude for the unexpected path that had brought us all to this moment of clarity about what truly matters. I returned inside to find my parents at my dining table, already sketching renovation ideas for the Victorian on Elm Street, arguing good-naturedly about whether to restore the original floor plan or create a more open concept while preserving key architectural details. "What do you think, Cassandra?" my father asked, genuinely interested in my opinion. "You're the expert on balancing restoration with practical modernization." I smiled, joining them at the table. "Let me show you what we've learned works best." And as the February snow continued to fall gently outside my windows, we planned our next chapter together not as the family we once were, defined by expectations and appearances, but as the family we had become through loss, growth, and the unexpected discovery that sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't money at all, but the wisdom to know what truly matters. I'm Cassandra Mitchell, 31, and I once watched my parents' $2 million mansion burn to the ground from across town. But the real story isn't about destruction, it's about what we built from the ashes.